Is going to be today. We're going to talk about the lions, aren't we? Okay. And this is an interesting picture because he's pretty old, and he wasn't young when this happened. Okay, let's review. Remember, every month we're going through the book of Daniel, and chapter 6 is the last chapter that is not prophetic. The rest of them are. We've had one chapter that was prophetic. What happened? Somewhere around 605 BC. How long ago was that? 2,600 and let's say 30 years ago, plus or minus a few years. We don't really know how accurately some of that stuff is. He was taken as a hostage to Babylon. What did he do? As a young man, he said, I will not compromise. Remember? Even on the matter of his diet. He wasn't going to eat pork. He wasn't going to eat the king's food. And what did God do in return? He gave him wisdom, right? So he did something that most people never do. He was smarter than his teacher. You ever been smarter than your teacher? Do you ever think you were smarter than your teacher? No? Well, he really was, right? Okay, then chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a prophetic chapter about us. And the Babylon, the head is Nebuchadnezzar. They invented something that is critical to our civilization. How to measure things precisely that you can't touch, you can't feel, you can't weigh them or something. And what did the Greeks, the Persians do? They invented money. They didn't actually invent money, but they instituted money as a means of paying taxes and everything else. The whole way our government works, sub-governments, you have a county government, a city government, all these different governments, they built all that. They were the first multiculturalists. Absolutely. Cyrus was a really profound guy. What did the Greeks do? Do you know what's going on right now in Italy? You've been watching the Olympics? Why do we care about the silly Olympics? They founded that 2,700 years ago, right? Because our heritage is part of the Greek world. If you go to school, you learn to think like a Greek, no matter where you are. How do Greeks think differently than other people do? They have a certain fundamental assumption, a basic idea, a basic belief, and they build their science and their way of thinking on that. That's how we learn, but we never talk about that, but that's important. What did the Romans do? Do we have three-part governments? Huh? Do we call our government a republic? They called it a respublica, the people's thing, right? So this is part of our heritage. What's going to happen? Jesus is coming. What's he going to do? The entire image is crushed. How do you crush the past? When he comes, the heritage is not going to be there anymore. We're going to live in the world of peace and justice because Jesus is going to set up his kingdom. Is that going to be great? I think it will be. Daniel chapter 3, those three friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, you got to bow down to this image. They said, we won't. And they said, we'll throw you in the fire. He says, go ahead. Our God can take care of us. And he did. Right? Interesting thing there. Okay, chapter 4. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a second dream. And in this dream, he had this tree and it all, the tree got chopped down and all this stuff. And Daniel explained, watchers, angels were watching him and saying, your pride is awful big, fella. We're going to take you down a notch, right? And you're going to lose your mind. And it actually says that it talks about donkeys. And donkeys, these wild donkeys, they live in the desert. So I think he was out in the desert. He wasn't on the lawn of the palace, right? He was out there eating grass, right? Until he learned that God gives authority to whom he wills, and sometimes he chooses the lowest of men. Was Nebuchadnezzar pretty low? I think he was, You ever wonder where we get our politicians from, right? Are some of them the lowest of men, right? Daniel chapter 5, remember that chapter 5 is this son of the king, then Belshazzar, who was having a big party, and he figured these guys can't get into my city. And on that night, the Medes and the Persians got through. They drained the river. They drained it off. They got in. and they killed Belshazzar, and the Medes and the Persians took over. That was part of the dream of chapter 2. The Medes and the Persians are the next kingdom that's in the sequence, right? So today, Cyrus the Great, by the way, he was a really interesting fellow. If you like to read about him, you don't have to read books. If you have an internet connection, you can say Herodotus, Cyrus, and the AI will show you. Just say, I don't want AI. Just say, I want to read it in Herodotus' book. And he'll give you the book and he'll give you the chapter, and you can read it without reading the whole book. It's all online. It was written, Herodotus wrote 2,400 years ago, so you can read it. And it's very interesting about Cyrus and what he tells about him. Okay? And this is Cyrus. If you see down here on the bottom, that little kind of a pinkish area, that was the area where Cyrus was kind of a king of. I don't know if you can see my, anyway. But anyway, he conquered this big kingdom. Okay, let me see if I can, I messed up here. Okay, this is the kingdom that this guy, he was a fellow that didn't have a whole lot going for him. He was raised as a kind of a son of a herdsman that took care of cows or something. He ended up conquering this whole kingdom 200 years before he was born. Isaiah predicted him by name and said, I chose you. I've got a plan for you. I'm going to open doors for you, all this kind of thing. Why? Because God had a plan for Israel to get back to the land. So he conquered this all except Egypt. Egypt, his son conquered, right? And so now we get to chapter 6. I'm going to just read this thing because it's a fairly simple thing, but you can follow it on the screen if you can see it. It seemed good to Darius to appoint. Now, who was Darius? Darius was the name of the king. I think that Darius and Cyrus are the same person. He was raised as a Mede as a kid. He probably had a Median name. His mother was a Mede. And the Medes, by the way, live in the Zagros Mountains, where Kurt goes every year to over there to Iraq, Kurdistan. If you go east of there in the Zagros Mountains, that's where their capital city was. It's in the mountains up there. And so he appointed 120 satraps. What's a satrap? He's kind of like a governor, right? He was in charge of a certain area of the country, right? Over the kingdom. Now, are those 120 satraps in Babylon? I think they're over the whole kingdom, right? And they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, it says so. And over them, 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one. So this king says, we're going to set this thing up. We're going to organize it right. We're going to have 3 people in charge of these other 120, and I'm just going to monitor them all, and I don't have to worry about everything going on, right? And these 3 satraps, all the satraps would be accountable to them, that the king might not suffer loss. So Daniel is like one of the chief people in the kingdom. How does he know about Daniel? Maybe when he got there, they said, hey, do you know when Belshazzar was killed, there was this old man standing here, and he just predicted it, right? And they said, who is this guy? He's really an interesting guy. And they got to talking to him and said, hey, this guy is really an amazing person. Let's put him in charge. Have you ever heard a story in the Bible that was similar to that? You ever heard of Joseph, right? They looked around and said, who could be better to put in charge, right? And so the same thing is happening to Daniel. And so again, I think that his name, Darius the Mede, means the holder of goodness, or some other words like that. In my opinion, him and Cyrus were the same person. In the end of this chapter, it says Darius the Mede, and it uses a little Hebrew letter that could mean and, or it's the same as Cyrus. They were both the same age, and Darius was a Mede when he was young, right? And so he liked to give himself different personalities in different ways because he was a multiculturalist, right? He wanted to be something to everybody. Okay, so who was Cyrus? He's a minor prince who grew up a Median herdsman. He was a great politician. Imagine if somebody came to America with an army and they took over the country. And you say, oh my goodness, that's terrible. What's it going to be? Is it going to be the Russians? What's it going to be? He would take over a country. When he came in, he says, I came here to free you. I liberate you. I'm not your enemy. I came here to be your friend. Can you imagine somebody who could do that? He was a real politician. He could convince people he was on their side, even while he had an army doing it. Right? He was an amazing person. And this picture here is a picture of Cyrus that is it's an imitation of a statue in southern Persia, and it's a little bit better. You can see he's got on the top of his head, he's got this Egyptian type of crown that has goat's horns around it and 3 big jugs with balls on top of them. I don't know what that thing means. He's got wings around him like he's a god, right? But that's the only picture we have of Cyrus, probably of him, what he looked like. So, and these are his satraps. These are carved in his palace there in Pasargadae, which was probably built after he was dead, because he died at 70 years of age. And so these are guys. Most of these guys, some of them have a few knives and stuff like that, but they don't carry spears. They're the people who are running the kingdom, running the governors and stuff like that, right? And those are carved in stone, so we still got them. And then Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. You think that would have got some opposition, this guy is so honest that the king says, this guy is so honest, let's put him in charge of everything. We'll make him the super guy in charge of everything. Everybody's an answer to him. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find grounds of accusation against Daniel in regard to the government affairs, but they could find no grounds of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Now notice that something interesting there. You could be non-corrupt by not doing anything, right? You could sit back here and fold your hands and say, I am going to take a nap and I'm not being corrupt, right? But he is doing things. He's actually active. He's not negligent, and yet nothing he does is corrupt. He's not doing anything wrong. And when by the way, the Bible says when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. You think that was a good thing for them to have Daniel in charge? I think it was. When the wicked man rules, the people groan. You ever seen anybody groaning? Did they ever complain and said, man, this place is falling apart? It makes a difference, doesn't it? And and here's another verse. A bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. What's corruption? Corruption, a lot of times, is they slip you a little money so you give them a favor, right? And here's another verse. He who profits illicitly troubles his own house. If you're making money and it's not fair, it's not right what you're doing. But he who hates bribes will live. Those are Bible verses, right? So this is what happens in corruption. Somebody gives you a gift, and in return, you give them a favor, blah, blah, blah. In the Philippines right now, they're having a big complaint about all this money that was spent on projects for water flooding, and the projects never got done at all, and all the money disappeared. Is that a good sign that it was corrupt? Right? Yeah. And this is a map here of the world, and somebody has made this map, and this is supposedly the countries that have the less corruption. And if you look at Antarctica, it's gray, and so is Greenland. There's nobody lives there, right? Very few people. There's not much corruption going on there because it's snow and ice, right? But some countries, the darker the Norway and New Zealand are considered to be fairly less corrupt. They also don't have a lot of people, and I think New Zealand has more sheep than it has people, And but some countries that are black, they're really corrupt, like Somalia or some of those places. Russia is pretty corrupt. They're red, see. And some countries like America and Canada are less corrupt, but that doesn't mean they don't have corruption. on the scale of corruption, they're halfway in there somewhere. Right? The Philippines shows more corruption than America, right? But so and nobody knows. This is just a guess. By the way, Venezuela shows a lot of corruption, doesn't it? So corruption is part of our world. It's there. I mean, it works, but here was Daniel, and he wasn't playing that game. Amazing. Then these men said, "We will not find any grounds of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." Now, there's an interesting statement. You ever heard the expression, if you were on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Have you ever heard that expression? They could convict him on only one thing. He was a godly man, right? And they realized that, and they said, well, what are we going to do about this guy? We're never going to find him doing anything wrong unless we make it about his worshiping God. So these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius lived forever. By the way, the word forever is not a biblical word in the sense. It really meant live for the eon. It means live a long while, right? It's not, they didn't think he wasn't going to die. But it's just a statement that they're making. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satrap, the high officials, the governors, have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's pit. Actually, the word is pit rather than den. A pit is kind of underground, right? And by the way, this is an Asian lion. If you look at an Asian lion, how can you tell an Asian lion from an African lion? The Asian lion has kind of a fold of skin down on its belly. You see that kind of fold of skin hanging down there? They usually have less of not as big a mane as an African lion, but they'll still eat you. They'll still, but anyway, by the way, it's interesting that the ancient kings, they liked to hunt lions. That was one of the big things that they did. They said, I'm a tough guy, and I hunt lions. Well, how do you know you're going to find a lion if you want to hunt him? Well, you have a den or a pit full of lions. And on the day the king wants to go hunting, they let some lions out, right? In this favorite park where he likes to go hunting. And then he hunts them down, right? So that way they know he's going to find a lion because they let the lion loose just before the king shows up, right? So that was a trick. This is actually Ashurbanipal, the king of Assyria. And you can see he's sticking a sword right through this lion, but the lion's already been shot with an arrow. He made this image of himself. He says, I'm a tough guy, right? I can take a lion on single-handedly, right? Here's some other pictures from the Assyrians where the king would go out and shoot arrows at lions and then kill them. And he's kind of like, by the way, Putin likes to play those games. I'm a tough guy. You ever seen that? He makes a lot of things. So they said, now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Now, this is a really interesting characteristic. Herodotus, who wrote that book, which was called Historia or History, all history books today are named after his history book. Why? Because he wrote the first history book, right? That was specifically designed not to be religious, but to be trying to find out what really happened, right? And sign the document so that it won't be changed. They had a rule when this new king came in there. They said, let's not have kings that keep changing the rules on us. If the king says something, then it's got to be, they actually have records. Herodotus says one of the Persian kings actually made a decree that his friend, he said, you're guilty, you're going to execute you. And then he found out that he was wrong, he wasn't guilty. And he had to execute him anyway because he couldn't change what he had said, right? So that was part of their it's like their constitution. Kings had some limit on them. They weren't like Nebuchadnezzar, they could do whatever they want. They had a limit. They could say, the gods told me to do it, I can do it, but I can't change my mind. So, by the way, this is a seal. How do you sign something? This is a seal of Darius the Great. Darius the Great was king about 20 years after Cyrus was. And he actually wasn't a son of Cyrus. He took it's real interesting how he managed to get hold of the kingdom. You can read that on Herodotus if you want to look him up. But this is his seal that he would roll out on a piece of, and on there, what is Darius do? He's fighting the lion, right? You see that? So that's part of the Darius. One of these guys, they like to fight lions. So therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. And when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. So what's Daniel going to do? Is he going to hide? Is he going to close the window? He doesn't even close the window. He says, look, I do things the way I've done it for years. He's an old man. He's like 80 years old. And here he is. He's going to go to his window, and why does he pray towards Jerusalem? Because God has promised his people are going to go back to Jerusalem. And he's part of this system that's going to bring it back. So this would be an old house. You'd have ladders. They didn't have fancy palaces. If you were in Babylon, your house was made out of clay bricks. If his house was in Pasargadi over there in the southern Persia area, they had stones there. But if you were in Babylon, you didn't find stones, because everything was mud and clay. So if you needed stone, you had to go upstream somewhere and find a mountain somewhere and get some stones. So he goes up there and he opens the window. What does he do? He knows they're watching. He knows why the law is being passed to trick him, right? And he says, so what? I'm going to do what I know is right. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? He's got a backbone to him, doesn't he? Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. And then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den or pit? Right? And the king replied, the statement is true according to the laws of Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. And then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, they didn't say Daniel, who was the chief guy in the government. They cast him in a bad light, right? Pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you have signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. Why couldn't he deliver him? He's the king. You ever remember the story about Esther in the Bible? That was also a Persian king. And what did she ask the king to do? He said, well, I can't change the law. It's already been signed. What can I do? I can authorize the Jews to make their own armies and defend themselves. Remember that? Similar type situation. He was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. Even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. In other words, maybe, I don't know that they had lawyers in those days, but he was trying to find a way to get around the law that he could rescue Daniel. And then these men came to agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute that the king establishes may be changed. Boy, they're hammering him, right? They're saying, we want to get rid of Daniel, and we've tricked you, and we've got the upper hand here, and you've got to throw Daniel to the lions. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's pit. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. So notice that the king has understood something about Daniel's integrity, that he worships this God, right? And a stone was brought and cast and laid over the mouth of the pit, and the king sealed it with his signet ring. Remember that signet ring was something that you sealed on a piece of clay or wax or something like that. And the signet ring of his nobles, they came and also sealed it. Hey, he's down there. We put him in there. We know he's in there. He's locked in. The lions are going to take care of him. That nothing could be changed in regard to Daniel. So there they are. They're all putting their seals on the stone over the entrance to the pit. Right? And there again is the seal of Darius the Great, who shows 2 lions. One is already killed, and the other one he's trying to kill. And so there's a picture of maybe what Daniel would look like when he went down in the pit. All the lions stood around and said, looks like a tasty meal, but we're not hungry right now. Right? But so he spent the night down there. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's pit. So here he is. He's going to find out, did God really save this guy? And when he had come near to the pit, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, constantly been able to deliver you from the lions? Well, here comes Daniel down in the pit, right? And then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live for the eon. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not done anything against me. So there's the king up there looking down through the hole of the pit, right? And there's Daniel down there with the lions all sitting around there, still hungry, but they haven't had lunch. And they haven't harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime. So sometimes even Christians who do bad things, they can suffer for their crimes. It isn't what you reap, you sow. Is that a law that applies to everybody, believers and non-believers? If you do something bad, expect bad things to happen. It happens to everybody, right? So this is a famous painting, I think, from Raphael from some 100 years ago. Daniel sitting down there, and the lions are all kind of wishing that they had lunch. And then the king was very pleased, and he gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the pit. So Daniel was taken up out of the pit, and no injury whatsoever was found in him, because he had trusted in his God. And then the king gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their wives and their children, into the lion's pit. And they had not reached the bottom of the pit before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. By the way, in the Bible, the rule of Moses is you don't punish the children or the family for the evil that a person does. Only the person is supposed to suffer for their own evil. So the courts are not supposed to. But this king, he's a pagan king too, and he wanted to let everybody know, you don't mess with me. And she threw them all in there, and the lions had lunch. And then Darius the king wrote to all the people, nations, and languages living in all the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, by the way, notice all the dominion, it's not just Babylon, it's the whole thing, right? That men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God who endures for the eons, and his kingdom shall not be destroyed. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in skies and earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus. In other words, in this passage, it can also be understood the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus, they were identically the same person. They were both the same age. And and I think that it may be that when he was young, his name because he was raised at Meade, he was a multiculturalist. He tried to play all sides of it. You ever notice that politicians, when they talk to one group, they'll act like they're part of that group, and then we talk to another group, they're part of that group. He did the same thing, right? And ancient kings, by the way, often had several names. We find that also in the Bible. There are Assyrian kings who says this is his name, and then also his other name was, remember, this was Herodotus. This is his empire that, again, remember, he came down there from Persia, which is down there. We have a big military aircraft carrier down in that area right now, and they're talking about what they're going to do, are they going to get rid of their nuclear weapons, blah, 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 all this stuff. This is where these guys came from, right? And so the red part over there is the part that he captured from Babylon. The rest of it, the story of how he captured Lydia, if you want a real good story, read that on Herodotus. He actually went in there. The story is that the king of Lydia, whose name was Croesus, he went to the oracle and he asked him, I want to start a war with the Medes. Who's going to win the war? And they said, you can't lose the war unless a mule becomes king. And he says, no mule is ever going to become king. And the story, the oracles, they make things up in such a way they can work both ways, right? The mule was Cyrus because he was born, he was part Mede and part Persian. And so he lived in two different cultures. And the story was, the oracle said, he's the mule. And so when he went to war with him, he did a bunch of really fancy stuff. He got a bunch of camels to go in there and charge. And the horses had never seen camels and they all ran off. So he took this great king and he did it very quickly. And in a matter of a few days, he took the city of Sardis and took their whole empire, which had been predicted long ago. This is in Isaiah. I, the Lord, say of Cyrus, my shepherd. What's he calling him? This is from Isaiah. This was 200 years before this event. And he will perform my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built. And of the temple, your foundation will be laid. What did Cyrus do? He allowed the Jews to go back. Why did God give him this great kingdom? So that he would let the Jews go back. You understand what's going on here? So Isaiah 45, God calls Cyrus by name. Subdue nations, he says. I will open doors for you. The gates will not be shut. I will go before you, make rough places smooth, give you treasures of darkness, give you a title of honor, though you do not know me. This is predicted of Cyrus. So God has got a plan for Cyrus. What's Cyrus's plan? Why does he need to do that? Why? For the sake of Jacob, my servant, Israel, my chosen one, I call you by your name, though you have not known me. By the way, in Ezra chapter 1, we have the decree of Cyrus where he gave a decree. He says the Jews can go back. They can build their temple. He even gave them 4,500 gold and silver plates and stuff that they could take back with them that Nebuchadnezzar had taken. And he said, go build your temple and I'll give you some money to do it, right? So this was an important official because God had predicted through Jeremiah and Ezekiel that he would bring the Jews back after 70 years. And what's he doing? He's making it happen. He's making it happen. He even predicts how it'll happen. And so they returned and they rebuilt the temple. 5,400 articles. I said it wrong. 4,500. 5,400 articles of gold and silver that were returned to the Jews so they could rebuild and start their worship of God again. So, why Israel? Why is God interested in Israel? Is Israel more righteous than other nations? I don't think they are. Do they do bad things too? Yeah, they do. Why does God have this deal about Israel? Well, he promised their great-grandparents, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I got a plan for you. I'm going to bless all the people of the world through you. Through your seed, one person, one seed. Who is he? Jesus. I'm going to bless every family of the world through him. He has a plan. He's bringing it to pass. So why? So that he could die for the sins of the whole world. That's why Jesus came. He had to be born in a family that wasn't serving Baal or something. He had to be a family that would raise him in a righteous way. And why? So that he could come in the last day and give life to those who trust him. Now, this picture here is a picture. I went on Amazon this morning, and Amazon has a memory better than I do. Have you ever noticed that? I bought this book on February 1, 2011. And Amazon said, oh, you bought that book on February 1, 2011. Why do you want to buy it again? Well, I just wanted to look it up. This guy, his name is Edelon von Steinberg. And Edelon was a guy who he was part of the Belgium Gospel Mission. My aunt, whose name was Klaasien van der Gevel, right? And her sister, who was 10 years younger, her Marguerite van der Gevel, right? And they were living in Belgium years ago. And Klaasien met this guy and went to, he hired her to be like a clerk or secretary. Probably the typewriters were really difficult to click the fingers on in those days. But Mr. von Steinberg, he was a believer. He'd been a sergeant in the Belgian War and World War I, went to England. His British nurse told him about Jesus. He trusted Jesus. He went back and he taught my aunt about Jesus, and she trusted Jesus. And then my aunt says, please hire my sister so she'll find out about Jesus. Is that interesting? And then the two sisters, they started praying for their parents. Because their parents were, they prayed, and whenever they ate, they said, please God, thank you for the food, that kind of stuff. But they didn't understand that faith in Jesus is what brings you salvation. So they prayed. And my mother used to go to von Steinberg's house. She had a crush on one of her sons, right? She thought he might marry her someday, right? But she was led to trust Jesus because of this man. And there's only one copy of the book available on Amazon today. But here he is. Here's the verse. They prayed for their parents. Please, God, help my mother and father to come to trust you. And one day, my grandfather, Johann von Hebel, he was reading the Bible. And here's what he read. He read, he who believes in the Son has eon life. Some Bibles say eternal life, but your life doesn't end, right? But he who does not obey the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. And Johann said to his wife, Moppy, we have life. We got it. We have it now. Why? Because we believe that Jesus died for us. Isn't that amazing? And so my grandfather came to trust Jesus because of this verse in the Bible. Is that interesting? Can you and I trust Jesus that way today? Absolutely. Does he save anyone who comes to him in simple faith and says, please, God, I'm a sinner. Jesus died for me. Thank you so much that you died for me. That's what salvation is. It's believing that Jesus died for you. Isn't that wonderful? Part of the story of how Jesus came is Cyrus the Persian and Daniel. They're all part of this long lineage of how Jesus came and did what he did for us. Okay, next month, we get into some really tough parts of the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 7 is a prophetic chapter. And Daniel 7 and Daniel 17 and Revelation 17 are very similar chapters. They have similar statements in them. If you are interested in prophecy, I ask you, read these two chapters maybe once a week in the next month, right? Because they're tough chapters, but I think we can tackle them. Because what we're going to do, we're going to talk about what's going to happen in the future. God can tell you what's going to happen in the future because he's going to do it, right? And Jesus is coming. Do you believe Jesus is coming? Do you look around at the news and say, wow, really weird things are happening in Syria and all these different places? Do you think maybe he's coming soon? Well, I believe he is coming soon. And prophecy is part of that thing. He came to die for us, but he didn't just come to die for us. He's coming again to save us from civilization, from the politicians, from everything. He's going to establish justice on earth. Isn't that good? If you haven't trusted him now. He died to save you. All right, Kurt, anything? All right. Okay. Thank you, Lord, for this wonderful story about this guy, Daniel, and how you used him in a very special way to help the Jews to go back to their country, which you had predicted would happen. Thank you for this food that you provided, Lord. Give us wisdom that we might tell people about you this week, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.